I think we're going to get started. Cool. Can you guys hear me okay? Thumbs up? Awesome. Cool. So good afternoon. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks for showing up. I know you guys had options. There's 6 other options, so thank you for actually choosing this one. And hopefully everybody had a great lunch. Hopefully you got some caffeine, energy drink, something to keep you awake. I know it's going to be a challenge, so I'll do my best to keep you entertained and engaged, okay? But if I do see some heads nodding, I have some weapons here, so just be careful now. Also, all jokes aside, welcome to this roadblock session, which is called From Bottleneck to Breakthrough, where we're going to be looking at actually discussing how to overcome integration hurdles. Really excited to be here. It's my first FinTech DevCon. It's been great so far, just meeting new partners. I ran into a lot of ex-colleagues, so I'm really hoping this is not going to be my last. I do want to take a moment just, again, to thank the organizers, the sponsors, and more importantly, you for actually showing up. When they say it takes a village, it's a fact. So again, thank you to all you guys. Just to get us going, a little bit about myself and who I am. On the personal side, I'm from Argentina, Hola. So if you guys want to talk football, reach out. When I say football, real football. So I've been living in Dallas, Texas for the last 10 years. I spent about over 20 years working in the software and technology space, wearing multiple different hats. Started off as an engineer, architect, did some consulting, but probably for the last 10 or 12 years, I've been actually driving different product roles. A lot of my career was actually spent in the travel and technology space. Worked for a company known as Sabre. They're based out of Dallas. If you don't know who Sabre is, they're kind of like the backbone behind companies like Expedia, American Airlines. If you SAP Concur Travel, if you heard the call light this morning from Simon, and there I really got a chance to actually step in and actually play my first roles actually driving developer-first products. After that, I spent a couple years working in Teradata in the data analytics space. There, I learned when it comes to actually managing developer-first products, you have different developer personas, right? So solution engineer solution developer versus solution engineer or data engineer, data scientist, somewhat alike but somewhat different, right? They have different. They're all looking to solve problems. They're all creators, but many times they have different tools or different ways of how they actually want to solve those problems. Where I am today, I'm part of Docusign. So I'm also part of the project management organization. I lead many of our developer experience efforts. So Docusign has a large community of developers from customers and partners that are actually building and integrating on Docusign. If you're not aware of who Docusign is, in case we have either some international people or later on in the session with the recording, at least every time I go back home to Argentina, I still have to educate, hey, who is Docusign? So we are very well and recognized, trusted brand, but I'll spend a little time speaking to who Docusign is. A little bit about today's session. Again, I'll start off with a brief intro, a little history on Docusign. Then I'll step into the agreement trap, which is really around kind of like the problem space that I'm going to be talking to today. And then, I'm sharing, talking about kind of like, how to actually overcome these integration hurdles. So sharing some insights, learnings, perspectives on, some of the strategies you can actually take when it comes to this problem space. I'm hoping to leave plenty of time for Q&A towards the end or just, informal, catch up. So, we'll keep it going. And it's a small audience, right? So feel free to interrupt me along the way, okay? If something doesn't make sense. A bit of housekeeping, just real quick. These sessions, of course, are being recorded. The slides will be available. But if you do want to take a picture, post it online, you do have my verbal consent. I encourage you and thank you for actually doing that. Talked about Q&A. Feedback, I'm a product person by heart. So, all feedback is great feedback. We can always do better, with versus the current state. So as I look to come back or actually encourage other partners or colleagues to actually come back, your feedback is highly encouraged, right? So, take a moment at the end of the session to just provide your feedback on the Ethereum app. Cool, just to get us going. So I'm sure many of you recognize Docusign, right? For being an e-signature company, right? So we provide a platform, products that enable different parties to actually come together and agree with more or less an online digital experience. We were founded back in 2003. Initially, a lot of our focus was in the real estate industry, but then we've expanded, right? So today, we have presence on majority of the verticals, right, across healthcare, financial services, HR, I mentioned real estate, so and many more, right, sales, et cetera. Today, Docusign supports over 1 million customers, and more importantly, we've supported more than 1 billion, if I want to say, signers, right, that have actually used our product, right, when it comes to actually coming together and actually agreeing with different parties. We're really committed to sustainability. I think there's a number out there that says the amount of digital agreements or contracts that we've actually supported is the equivalent to about 100 billion pages. So now it just really reflects our significance, on us actually reducing the overall environmental impact. Where's Docusign today? Earlier this year, if you are a Docusign customer or not, potentially, or a partner, I know we did kick off this journey, which we call the Intelligent Agreement Management platform. This is all about us, looking at the entire agreement lifecycle, right? The entire agreement process, right? And us enabling our customers to actually unlock, incremental value that goes just beyond the simple e-signature. Speaking to agreements, if not obvious, I'll just put it in a simple word. The world does run on agreements today. If you think about it, they're really the foundation of every business. They govern trillions of dollars, right, of economic value, right, that actually comes together, that's tied to different agreement parties, right, that actually come together. That, on top of that, if you think about any company or any organization, right, they manage hundreds to thousands of contracts and agreements on a yearly basis, right? That number may sound large, but if you think about really anything that matters, right, that you do today, let it be on the business side, on the personal side, there's probably some type of an agreement transaction that actually takes place. But the thing I just want to highlight, right, when it comes to agreements, right, and agreement processes is a lot of times, maybe on the consumer side, you may think about just an agreement or a digital agreement just being that simple e-signature, right, that's actually being captured between different parties. But there's a lot of things that actually take place before and after when you think about kind of like an end-to-end agreement process. Before is really, there's different parties that are reviewing contracts. I'm sure many of you enjoy working with legal as they're actually redlining things. How you actually prepare those contracts, there's information they actually need to take in from different systems of record. When it comes to the actual agreement transaction, right, of signing, the end signer, before they actually sign, may need to validate who they are with some type of digital experience or through some type of notary. After that, those signatures actually take place. A lot of the information, right, that exists inside of the agreement, you need to take in, actually, bring into, some other system, right? Let it be reporting for follow-ups. Let it be a system of record where you need to actually update information, where you need to actually or kick off some other process, right? If you're onboarding an employee, get them a MacBook, get them what it actually needs. So there's a lot of complexity, right, when you think about kind of like the end-to-end agreement, especially if you think about, the area of financial services, right? Highly regulated, a lot of strict requirements, right? So a lot of things that, they actually come into play. And, unfortunately, today, despite, the many advances that you see in technology, right, most of organizations of all sizes, right, manage these agreements in very dated ways, right? So even though they've moved from pen and paper, right, to more of a digital transaction, there's still a lot of problems that we actually see out there, right? So a lot of manual work that actually needs to be done, manual work to actually get information, bring it into an actual agreement. A lot of these agreements are actually disconnected, right? The processes on how they're actually managed. A lot of the data that you see in actually in agreements, maybe it's just a static file, right? So it's just a PDF that you've scanned or you've uploaded, or and then that information is just in those. So when you think about all this valuable information, right, that a lot of times is trapped inside of these static files, they're really blocking you from leveraging them from actually getting insights, answering critical business questions, not enabling you to actually automate some of these processes. And this is what what we call the actual agreement trap. Every time I say that, it reminds me of Captain or Admiral Akbar from Star Wars. Right? It's a trap. I don't know. Maybe that doesn't resonate with you, but it comes to my mind. But more importantly, this agreement trap, right? Earlier this year, Deloitte did a study. They talked to organizations of all sizes, right? And part of that study actually revealed that there's over, I think it's $2.7 trillion, right, of unlocked value, right? And that that these actual organizations cannot actually leverage, right? Let it be on getting actually better insights on SLAs. I don't know, anticipating renewals of contracts, build better deal management. So a lot of opportunity, right, when we think about kind of like this agreement trap. But in this study, right, that I mentioned that was done with organizations of all sizes. And by the way, this study is available. It's online. It's a great paper. Check it out. I have a link at the end. But in this study that we did with many companies of all different sizes, all different lines of businesses, including financial services, so a lot of insights that you can actually leverage. One of the biggest needs that we heard was this challenge of the need of actually more seamless integrations, right? So being able to like tap into like off-the-shelf integrations, right, or solutions, right, that can enable them to like connect their systems to other systems, right, more or less. So this is a big need. So, and when you think about this, right, it's like, if you're a new product manager, a new engineer, you're working in a startup, or you're building this great and incredible product, and maybe you're a little naive, as I was, some years ago, right? You may think of that your product, your platform is kind of like the center of the world, right? It's the center of the universe. It's looking to actually solve all problems, right? But very fast, you're actually going to realize, right, that organizations today, they operate in very complex environments, right? So they need, many systems need to be able to talk to each other, right? They need to be able to operate in an interconnected system, right? So there's a big ecosystem out there. I'm sure if you look at all these brands and logos across, different, verticals, productivity, communication, I don't know, CRMs, you name it. I'm sure many of you actually use many of these products, right? Many of these platforms. So I think what I'm trying to highlight here is, this need for seamless integrations that was, potentially surfaced from an agreements perspective is probably very applicable to you. If not to you, to your product, maybe to your customers, right? So as you think about building and shipping products, just have that in the back of your mind, right? And kind of at least the approach that we took when it comes to actually solving some of these like integration hurdles. These are 3 strategies, right? I'm sure there's many others. And these are 3 strategies that we looked at, right? How you potentially, take these back. If this is something you want to do in parallel, sequence them. It's all going to be tied to, your customers, your needs, your use cases, the markets in which you operate, your product strategy. But, we looked at, building in-house integrations where you manage entirely by yourselves. We looked at actually tapping into, an ecosystem of existing partners that have actually solved this problem. And then the more, taking more of an open platform approach, right? Where you have developers and customers and partners can actually come and actually build. So there's many pros and cons to these insights and learning. So we'll talk a little bit about those in the next chapter. Before we get into that, I did want to spend a little time in terms of, hey, if this is like if it's the first time you're actually, building something that's tied to, financial services, right? And you're looking to actually talk to some of the big players that are out there, kind of like what to expect, right? Because especially, when it comes to actually working with a lot of these financial services companies, right? Now, in a perfect world, right? All these big companies that are out there, or, small, medium, you name it, they'll have open platforms that are modern. They're running in the cloud. They'll be compliant with standards. There'll be easy access for sandboxes and actually testing things. But you're going to find that's not always going to be the case. The reality is, a lot of these big players that still work with very hybrid systems. It's complicated to actually do business, right? It's like either getting access to their systems, getting access to their technology. They have potentially a lot of times very legacy systems, right? That have niche architectures, right? So anticipate a lot of complexity, right? Especially again when it comes to financial services, where there's a lot of strict requirements, right? Also, right, as you're working with potentially some of these big players, they know who they are, they know the weight they have, the weight that they have behind them. So anticipate that they're actually going to throw that at you, right? So depending where you are in your less product lifecycle, right, you may have to be a little more flexible, right? And you may have to make some decisions and trade-offs in the sense of, hey, do I focus more on platforming and building a foundation, or do I maybe focus on this customer, this need, and building more of a bespoke solution, knowing that there's a trade-offs and knowing that that's going to have some pros and cons when it comes to these things. So, getting into those, I talked about those 3 strategies, right? The first one that I mentioned was, in-house integrations, right? This is all in simple words. It's all, you build something, you own it, you maintain it, you have full control, right, of that. You define kind of like, hey, what makes sense for you? You're not dependent on an external partner or somebody else that's actually willing to actually come and actually build on your platform. There's an approach that you can take when it comes to this where many times you can spin this in the sense of like dog fooding, or I prefer more the, hey, drink your own champagne term, where you can actually take more of a crawl approach where you do invest in building like the platform foundation, but you don't immediately expose that to the actual external community, right? So you build the foundation, you consume that in-house, right? To actually build the integration, but you're still making progress on kind of like your long-term objective, right? Some of the pros and cons and learnings, first, I think I mentioned this, right? But it's, you control your own destiny, right? In terms of, hey, what's success, what matters for your company, for your customers, for the use cases, right? So a lot of times, this may be the first approach that you actually need to take, right? In terms of, hey, you control it and have it all under your hands, right? On top of the risk, if you are taking that more of that crawl dog fooding approach that I mentioned before, you can actually start to build that external empathy, right? So if you think about, hey, this platform foundation that you look at to expose come tomorrow to your developers, as you're actually dog fooding that, you can actually start to actually get insights in terms of, hey, does this thing scale? Does it support more like a platform approach? So a lot of insights that you can actually start to make there. On the challenges side is, I think if you're an engineer, the obvious is this is not going to scale, right? You can only do so much. And more importantly, beyond it's scaling or not to actually build the integrations that you need, don't assume this is a one-time thing, right? A lot of times executives think like, hey, I build it, we're done, move on to the next thing. If you're in product, you know that, hey, once you build and ship the first iteration of it, that's only when the journey starts, right? So expect maintainability, sustainability, and that's going to be a challenge, especially if you're doing just more than one thing. The other thing is the obvious, right, is as you're investing more in a point solution, you may be investing less in other areas, right, like platforming, right? So there's a balance, right, you actually need to manage. The other thing is also to consider is we had some examples where we said, okay, let's do it ourselves, and come tomorrow we will actually hand off the integration to let it be a customer or partner. That's the ideal world. That normally doesn't happen because once you build it, the partner may not take that on because they don't see a lot of value to them. Or sometimes, for example, it's like, hey, the way you've built that, even though it was meant to be more, from a third-party integration, you'll soon realize that there was shortcuts that were taken by engineering. There's technical depth, so it's like, okay, now there's an uplift to actually hand that over, right? So then you're blocked. So just some insights and learnings that we've actually went through. On the second option, right, that I mentioned is like really tapping into an existing ecosystem, right? So there are other companies, right, that do this for a living, right, where it is their core, right? Others that have spent time and effort actually, connecting to the, building integrations to the bigger interconnected ecosystem, right? And there's also this trend more and more where you see like more specialized, right, iPasses or specialized aggregators. We recently partnered with a company. It's known as Sandbox. The logo's a little off there, but they're like an iPass for banking, right? Sandbox. Okay, awesome. Great to have you guys here. There's also other like API aggregators like Merge, Knit. The value here again, these are people that are they have done this. They've got proven solutions. I'll speak to that. How you integrate these platforms? There's a couple options you can take. You can OEM them or actually build them. Just leverage them as part of your overall platform. So really abstracting that from a customer side. Sometimes you can actually take more of a referral motion. So you can integrate their platform, but their brand, their product is more or less exposed. So you can actually also like tap into their actual more or less like their platform credibility, right? Like Zapier, for example, very well known company. They have recently they started enabling like partners to actually embed their full-blown like workflow editor capabilities inside of other products. So there's definitely some options you can actually take in when it comes to actually leveraging the existing ecosystem. On the pros and cons, I briefly talked about this, but I think the first one on the pros is like these other partners in the ecosystem, they've built these proven solutions, right? It's their core. On top of that, if more or less, if you build once to them, a lot of times it enables you to like unblock and get access to the bigger ecosystem. And more importantly, I think the biggest one is like if this is not your core competency, just let others handle that. Partner, right, where it makes sense, right? So on the challenges side is, a lot of times when you may be constrained because a lot of times these aggregators, right, they're like building to the actual common denominator, right? So sometimes where you have differentiation compared to a competitor, that differentiation sometimes is challenging to like integrate, right, and to actually build into like this common, if I want to say, aggregator platform, right? So these are just things you have to build, balance out. On top of that, if you look at from a connectivity perspective, right, as you're potentially tapping into the bigger ecosystem, right, you may be enabling easier churn, right? Just because now you've enabled your customers to tap in, they may be able to pivot easily, right? So it's there's a pros and cons, right, that you actually need to think about when it comes to these things. Yeah. And last but not least, I talk about, hey, the approach of actually building more of an open partner ecosystem, right? I call this kind of like the field of dreams, right? If you haven't seen that movie, you're probably not as young as I am, in other words, but this is all about, hey, hoping that you'll build it and they will come, right? And you really, from a platform perspective, the dream is actually to become the actual enabler, right? You build a platform, you focus on the platform, developers from partners and customers actually building, right, and integrating to you. The obvious here is like, hey, the need for really, don't diminish the need for like a best-in-class developer experience. This is a dev conference. Hopefully I don't need to educate everybody on what that means, but more and more you see developers, right, for something that's easy to build and integrate with, how much they can actually influence the business, right, to actually get things done. The other thing, just to not under diminish here, is like that, when it comes to developers, especially from partners, right, beyond the technology, right, you can enable to them, just how are you going to actually incentivize many of these partners, right? They are going to look at, hey, how can they partner with you from a go-to-market motion perspective, right? So things to think about, right, when you're actually looking to actually build an open platform, right, and actually tap in and build this ecosystem, right, on your platform. On the learning side, speaking to the benefits, I think the first one, the obvious one, is kind of like this flywheel effect, right? In the sense of the more partners you get, the more integrations, the more flexibility and differentiation that you have on your platform. The more of that, you'll get more customers, and of course, more customers should attract more partners, and so on, right? So that's kind of like the obvious. The other thing is like something that we unlocked and unveiled, right? It's like, hey, a lot of times as you're thinking about that platform capability, let it be an API or a tool, SDK, you may be thinking about a specific use case, right, that's meant to unlock. And, and sometimes you're a little hesitant in the sense of, hey, because it's not perfect, and the use case that you think you support is pretty trivial, that you don't want to actually put it out there and expose that. But one of the things we've seen, right, as we've actually, built some of these API and platform capabilities is, as soon as we put it out there, it's like we learn from the dev community, hey, even though we intended to do X, our devs, our external community was actually doing it with Y, right? It wasn't our intention. We didn't think about that. So, don't be shy. Put it out there. Be upfront about, hey, what are the limitations? But believe me, in many areas, you could be surprised. On the challenges side, being platform, building an ecosystem, it's going to take time. It's a journey, right? It's a muscle you need to develop. So just because you build it doesn't mean they will always come immediately. When you talk to partners, not everybody's a startup. Larger organizations, right? They have annual, planning life cycles. You may get on a call, everybody's excited and hip, but when it comes to execution, they also have to take back and actually look at trade-offs, right? What is their roadmap, right? You may not be top priority for their roadmap. So just things to think about and actually anticipate. The other thing is, I briefly talked about this, but there will be challenges with standards, right? Even though you expect in today's world, a lot of these platforms, right, are compliant with like OAuth standards, you'll be surprised, right, in terms of how much technical debt may be out there. So your standards or what you anticipate are actually standards in the actual ecosystem may not always be the case. A lot of times also when it comes to your standards, right, and your enable external contributions, your quality may not be the benchmark for other partners, right? And there's one on the Docusign, one of the things that we think about, what is one of our biggest assets, right, or what we're most recognized is our brand, right? signers trust our brand, right? So when we're trying to like build a benchmark of quality, those are things that we definitely like think about. So just to wrap up, right? In terms of some of the things we actually talked about in terms of like key takeaways and learnings. One is I mentioned, hey, you are part of a bigger ecosystem, right? You are not the center of the world. You're not the sole provider. Your product does not live in a vacuum. So a lot of times integration, right, is no less important than actual differentiation. So things to think about. When it comes to customers and navigating them, there will be heavy players out there. They are going to influence and make some trade-offs that may not be ideal from a product strategy perspective, but you may have to be flexible, right? On the ecosystem side, right, just look into others, right? There's others that are solving this problem on every day, right? That's not tied to your core. So look into actually tapping in to others, right, in terms of how you actually solve this. And most important, right, it's a journey, right? Again, like I mentioned before, if you're trying to like become an open platform, it's a journey. It's a muscle you have to develop. So be patient, learn as you go, and yeah. So that's my talk for today. Thank you again for being here. Really appreciate your presence, and I think we have some time for Q&A. Thank you. Any questions? Here's my plug. If you do want to join, we currently have an open beta that's actually going on that's enabling partners to actually build on our platform. If you want to check that out, go to that QR code or come up and you learn more. There's a QR code for that the agreement trap study that I mentioned that was done by Deloitte. A lot of great insights you can actually tap into. So cool. Thank you, everybody.